everybody, to welcome Altadena and Beyond. My name is Isabel. I am the teen librarian at the Altadena Library District. My pronouns are she, her, and I am super excited to introduce someone who I am a personal fan of, so I'm like a little nervous right now, but I'm gonna power through. Jessica, I'm gonna read your bio for everyone who doesn't know. This is Jessica Lanyadoo. She is an internationally respected astrologer and psychic medium with fans and clients across the globe. She has been working to help people help themselves in one-on-one consultations since 1995 and writing her weekly horoscope since 2003. She's also the host of her twice-weekly astrology and advice show, Ghost of a Podcast. Fabulous, have recommended it to coworkers. Lanyadoo has co-hosted TLC's digital show Stargazing. She was the weekly astrologer for the San Francisco Bay Chronicle from 2003 until 2014. She's written astrology columns, she's lectured, she's well respected within the astrological community, and she was named the best psychic in San Francisco, which is incredible. What a bio. Everyone, please welcome Jessica. We're super happy to have you.
Thank you. I feel like what I should have put in the bio though is I am the owner of one tiny microphone in case you can't hear it.
A very small microphone.
I feel like that tiny microphone is like, it should be in my bio. I feel like I should get it like, I don't know, tattooed on shirts or something. I'm just obsessed with it.
Microphone. I do a lot of Instagram stuff. Okay, I'm going to make a little note to myself.
They come in colors is all I'm saying.
Microphone.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm obsessed. And I feel like as you were reading the bio, I was like, I forgot to add it. So welcome. Thank you. Thank you for that.
So my first question is, I got to check our compatibility here. Jessica, I do not know your sun, moon, and rising.
I have sun, moon, and rising all in the same sign. I am a Capricorn.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I don't know what to make of that. You, I'm sure, have thought about it extensively.
Yes.
I am almost there. I am a Scorpio sun and rising, Sagittarius moon.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you're a double and a triple. I'm just saying. I told
that to a gentleman at a bar one time and he was intimidated.
I feel like any man who's intimidated by a double Scorpio woman is a man to be avoided. You know what I mean? Bring forth your intensity.
To Scorpio teens, if you're out there, don't let anyone be intimidated by you.
No. And if they're intimidated, hopefully they're like, I'm intimidated and I'm excited, instead of I'm intimidated and so I back away. Like, exactly. If you're not a little intimidated, then what are we doing?
Challenge. Yeah.
Yes. Exactly. Yes.
So I'm very curious to get into our conversation. I want to hear all about you as much as you're comfortable sharing. My first question, though, is what were you like as a teenager? Like, what were your interests? Were you always into the esoterica or what?
So the teen years are many years. Like technically, what are we talking? Like 13 to 19?
Let's say like high school, like middle to high school.
Okay. So where I'm from Montreal, Quebec, and we don't have middle school. We just have high school goes grades 7 to 11. I was a huge nerd. And I don't mean that in like, I'm so cool, I'm calling myself a nerd way. I mean that, and I was like legitimately a nerd kind of way. I did not fit not in a cool way, but in a like not fitting in way. So it does get better. And I was always into woo-woo stuff. I was always into tarot. Well, probably started being really into that stuff around 15, like more objectively, but I got my first astrology book when I was 12. And I was terrible at high school, socially and academically. And I was terrible at homework. And it's interesting because I have been self-employed for so many years, and I'm really good at being a self-starter, and I'm really good at assigning myself tasks and getting them completed. And I always show up early and get things done on time. But high school was really hard for me. And it wasn't an environment that I thrived in at all. And it was very moody. It's very moody, and everything was difficult and hard. And I think those are the broad strokes. I can get more
Yeah.
specific. I just don't, but I feel like those
No,
broad
that's fair.
strokes. Yeah.
That's
I mean, it's
fair.
real talk. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. High school is, I feel like it's always refreshing to hear that like you can not fit in. Like high school is so hard. It's like never, even the people who look like they're having a great time, like, I don't know, like
Exactly.
it's not all it seems, you know?
I can say I went to public high school, and
Mhm.
on the first day of my last year of high school, I walked into the school and I was just like, this is hell. I cannot live through it. And so I went to I like left. This is maybe not the greatest story for me to tell to teenagers, but I feel like it's also worth
Be
it.
honest.
Um,
Yeah.
I left school that day in the middle of the day like a terrible child,
No.
and I found out about this alternative high school called Minds, and it was an acronym for Moving in New Directions. And I called my mother on a payphone because they existed. This was before cell phones. And I said, I don't want to go back to that school. I want to go to this other school I just found out about. And she's like, I don't care what you do, because my mother was not academically invested in my life. She said, I don't care what you do. If you can get yourself in, if you can do all the paperwork, you can go wherever you want. And so I did. And I got myself into this alternative high school for my last year, and it saved my life. It validated my capacity to be independent.
Mm.
And it was like this really great environment that encouraged us to like read the news and
Mm.
advocate for ourselves and be responsible for our own education. And that really worked for me. So my last year of high school was my best year of high school. And it was the time when teachers actually like took an interest in me, because it was also a small environment. There was 100 kids in 2 grades, maybe
Mm.
3 grades. It was very small. And so it really worked for me. And it was also public, but it was like the school where all the bad kids went. I wasn't a bad kid. I was way too nerdy to be a bad kid, but I fit in really well with them, it turns out.
It's good. I feel like getting that opportunity when you're young to like for to be like, this is what I want to do, and to have someone like take you seriously, or like kind of like those little moments of early autonomy when you're like, oh, wait, like I could decide something for myself. Like
Yeah.
once you figure that out,
Exactly, exactly. And I really like some of the friends I made in that high school, in that last year of high school. I'm 46 years old and they're still my friends. So I am friends with no one from the other high school, the tragedy high school.
you know.
But you know, the alternative high school, I'm still connected to some of those people, which is really cool because that was 100 years ago.
So you said that you got your first astrology book when you were 12. What was your like, what were you instantly captivated, or were you like, nah, did it kind of like, what was your early sort of exposure like?
Well, when I was like, I think 5 or 6 years old, I started talking to people about astrology. I was obsessed with astrology as a small kid, and I have no idea where I learned things, but you know, I was born in the mid 1970s, and astrology was similar to now, kind of really popular in the collective. So I may have kind of heard about astrology stuff that way, but I was always interested. So my mother got me a book about Capricorns. And she got that for me for my 12th birthday. And I read it like a Bible until my first year of CJAP. So I should name, and I don't want to make everyone jealous, but I'm about to. In Montreal, where I'm from, high school is grade 7 to 11. And then there's a 2 year government funded college program called CJAP. And you basically take university courses for like, no, it's not free, but it's almost free. It's like, I think it was like $60 a semester years ago. So you can figure out what you want to do before you go and spend all that money on university.
Wow.
Again, everyone's jealous right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you start that when you guys would be starting like grade 12, I guess. So
Okay.
it's grade 12, grade 13, essentially.
Yeah.
Is there a grade 13 here?
No, but there can be.
There could be.
Yeah.
Well, in Montreal, Quebec, it's called CJAP. Anyways, so I
Mhm.
went to this alternative CJAP, and so when I was, I guess, 18 or 17, I started studying astrology formally, because
Okay.
there is this Jungian psychologist who taught at the main, like, normie high school.
Okay.
I'm sorry, college.
Mhm.
And he taught at the alternative college astrology from a Jungian perspective.
Oh.
And so when I was 19 years old, uh, I didn't properly graduate
Huh.
from CJEP, but I left. I stopped doing it, and I moved to San Francisco to be an astrologer. And it's really just like my whole life has been dedicated to it. And I've had a couple jobs, but
Huh.
it's really what I've done my whole life.
Oh my
So I've
God.
been really lucky. And I'll
That's so cool.
say being a triple, having sun, moon, and rising all in Capricorn is part of why I figured out what I wanted to do for a living so early, and I was able to follow through, and I'm still doing it.
That's really fascinating. I was gonna ask if you ever like had any other career, like any, was there ever a moment where you were like, maybe I'll be something else? Or it sounds like you've kind of always.
I've always wanted this. The only exception is for a number of years, I worked with developmentally disabled children and seniors and adults. So, like, I kind of
Mhm.
worked with different demographics and I loved that work. But the system, I don't want to blow your mind, is broken. And
Oh,
so
what?
it would, yeah, I know it's shocking. It's shocking. No one knew. I am breaking the story. But the system is broken. So, the working with, um, that population in direct care was life affirming and wonderful and I loved it,
Mhm.
but working within the system was really draining and exhausting and low paying and an exercise in futility in a lot of ways. And so I did at one point, it was in my late 20s, I was doing that work in my mid to late 20s, and I had a moment of like, I don't know if I should do astrology. I love this, maybe I need to do
Mm.
this. But I saw that because of like systemic issues, it wasn't going to make me happy long term. I couldn't sustain it long term. And so I had the opportunity to become full time self employed, and I did that. And yeah, and that was in late 1999. And I have never looked back, never questioned it. I'm unique in that way. But again, if you're a triple Capricorn, it's not unlike it's not uncommon. It's just uncommon to be a triple Capricorn, but it's not
Yes,
uncommon to be
right,
this way. Yes.
right. um, Tell me about sort of, so you said you moved to San Francisco, you're like, I'm gonna do this. Tell me about how you sort of started to build your practice or your resume. I don't know if there are a lot of job postings for astrologers on like indeed.com or anything like that. So like how did you start to sort of to pick up some steam and to get more practice and more work?
Sure. So keep in mind, all of this, the building of my business occurred pre-internet.
Internet too, yeah.
So yeah, so there was no such thing as .com. I mean, maybe
Yes.
it technically existed, but it didn't really exist. So it was all word of mouth.
Mhm.
So my business strategy actually came from my grandfather. My grandfather is a Holocaust survivor. He, escaped the Nazis and he ended up, a whole trauma story. And then he worked in sweatshops in Montreal when he was able to come into Canada, and he brought over his whole family. And he worked in sweatshops for many years, and then eventually like saved the money and like started his own. I don't really understand what he did. He was a tailor, but he like had like a company. And what he explained to me, the only thing he ever told me about business, because I'm from old school people, and they were just like, "Don't worry about college, just marry rich. That's the only thing you ever need to worry about because you're not going to figure out anything on your own." It was very anti-feminist, but okay, it's fine. I'm gay. It all worked out fine. But the one thing he said was that he, when they moved to Montreal and he started to build his business, he made a business that served his community, and it was his community of other, Yiddish speaking Holocaust survivors. And that eventually he was able to expand beyond his community, but he never abandoned his community, that he started serving the people that were kind of his people, and that he kept on expanding and expanding, but never forgot his community. That is the only business advice I ever got. And it has really been the centerpiece of how I've worked, because as a queer person, when I moved to San Francisco, I was connected to other queers and other artists and social workers. And that's who I worked with. That's who came to me for readings. And then eventually, over the course of time, it expanded, right? So it was like some, artist friend of mine would get a reading, and then she would tell her mom, and her mom would come in, her mom would have a great experience, and then tell her friends. And then, like, next thing I knew, Susan from HR is like my client. So it kind of like expanded. And I'll say, not having any of this happen during the time of internet, not to sound as old as I am, but
Okay.
really helped because there was no comparing myself to others. There was no like, there's so much pressure on young people and older people to be at a certain place in our development professionally, but I wasn't comparing myself. And there was no astrology industry that is really like in the past 5 to 10 years that exists, that didn't exist then. There was no, there were no astrology jobs that didn't exist. So even like in magazines, if you were like picking up like whatever women's magazines to read horoscopes, most of those horoscopes were written by staff writers and not astrologers. Or if they were written by astrologers, they were written by astrologers who went to college with the like people who worked in the magazine. So it was kind of like a class issue. And like I said, not from money, not from, I didn't go to a university, not even from the US. So it did, none of that was an option. But eventually, and it was the San Francisco Bay Guardian. So the Chronicles exists now, but it was the Bay Guardian was like the progressive paper back in the day here. And so I was really lucky to get the opportunity to write for them. And, you know, I did that for many years. And through that process, I learned how to write, which I didn't know how to do because I didn't do well at school. So, yeah, I don't know if I've answered that, but
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really interesting. And I wonder, I have a follow-up question is like, as you're, you know, as you've said, you're self-employed, you've been self-employed for a very long time. Like how, I think something that a lot of young people, old people, everyone struggles with is knowing their self-worth and how do I like I especially imagine when you're sort of freelancing and you're a consultant, you're giving readings, you take clients, like how do you was it hard to sort of figure out like how much do I charge people? What do I do? Like how do I monetize this and make this into a business? Was that challenging or do you have any advice about that?
I have lots of advice. And it not only was challenging, it still is challenging for lots of reasons. Um, People are always going to tell you you're charging too much. People are always going to tell you, especially if you're a person of color or a woman, that you shouldn't charge for what you do, that you should be grateful for the opportunity. How many times have I been told by big brands that I should be grateful for the opportunity and take that gratefulness and shove it instead of get paid with cash?
Yeah.
So many times. And it never completely goes away. I think for me anyways, I think I have very anti-capitalist values. And so that also is like, it gets all sticky and tricky of navigating, working within the system and not self-sabotaging. So the way I started, this is not something that exists anymore, but I had rent control in San Francisco. I paid very little in rent. And because I didn't go to university, not that I'm trying to like be a poster child for not going to university, but because I didn't go to university, I didn't have any debts. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a computer. There was like, I didn't have financial goals. I didn't care about that sort of thing. And so for years I did barter. And barter would be like, I need a massage. I need my first reading I did in exchange for an aloe plant. And I don't think that that's as tenable for people unless you're from class privilege in these days because everything's so expensive everywhere. But at the time I was able to do that. So I'm very grateful. And there's a couple ways that I advise people to think about their fees. One is if you are self-employed or you're a freelancer and you want to do this for a long time, if you start your fee too high, you've got nowhere to grow. And not, it is. It's something that people like. I see people undercharge and overcharge really consistently. So do a basic Google search, or if we don't want to actually like advance Google, you can use like DuckDuckGo or some other search engine. Use a search engine and look at what other people are charging. You go on an app like Yelp to see what other people are charging and then to see if they're available. Because if somebody's charging $300 an hour for something and you contact them and they're available this week, they're not thriving. So you might want to look at the person who's charging a little bit less to be like, oh, they're booked out 6 months. That means that there's a high demand. So it might mean that they're great, but also there's a high demand and they have locked in a fee that people can pay. That $300 an hour person might be overcharging. The other thing to consider is, to a certain extent, like you have to consider who can afford you and if you want to work with them. Like that's, these are all relevant things. Now, when you're at the very beginning and you're thinking about how to negotiate your fee, being aware of what the market holds, like what's normal, right? And what's normal for your expertise level, and also understanding what it is that you need in order to make your ends meet. And all of these things are flexible. And when I say they're flexible, what I mean is they will change over the course of time, and when you are in the first years of anything, like whether it's anything woo like I do or any kind of business, it takes more time to complete a task than when you're like 10 years into it or 20 years into it or whatever.
Right.
So you want to factor that in, but also some of that you should charge for and some of it you shouldn't charge for. And again, that depends on what you're doing and what is conventional in your industry, right? So these are all things that I think are good. Now, I'll say one thing about the sliding scale, which is very popular. It's always very popular. Here's the problem with the sliding scale. I used to have a sliding scale, and there's two problems with it. Problem one, you end up negotiating money all the damn time. You end up talking about money all the time. And if you're somebody who's oriented to really care about others and what they can afford, you might not be somebody who really wants to negotiate your fee with every client.
Yeah.
And a sliding scale often requires that. And this is what ended my sliding scale. I had a woman come in. She came into my office. She was paying the bottom of my fee. And at the end of the session, she was like, "Oh, we went a few minutes over. Thank you so much. I have to go because I have a reservation at the restaurant down the block," which was too expensive for me to afford. And she also, in her reading, told me about the trip she'd just gotten back from. And so it made me really realize that while she's living her best life financially because she's undervaluing me and putting herself at the bottom of my scale, I can't afford to eat at that same restaurant on my block because I'm not charging my value. And I made the call at that time that I didn't want to be a micromanager of other people's finances. And I just needed to identify my value and stay with that,
Yeah.
So
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I always I think that, and even if you're not setting prices for yourself, but just like that, I love your advice about like, you got to have someplace to grow and have an awareness of like where you sort of exist in this moment in time of like, where do I want to get to? Like, what is taking up my time now? And like, how is that going to change?
absolutely.
That's great advice, even if you're not charging for your services,
If I could add one more thing to that,
absolutely.
if you're charging money for a service as a self-employed person, I cannot stress this enough. And people are surprised I say this because of what I do for a living. But if you don't respond to emails in a timely fashion, if you don't have an appropriate, whatever that means, but an appropriate sign off on your email, if you don't kind of listen to what the client needs or is saying and kind of reflect it back to them as a way to effectively communicate, you're going to have trouble. It doesn't matter how good you are at what you do. Some of it is figuring out how to communicate and how to listen. And I think that that's something where I've seen a lot of people in creative fields who are amazing not really get anywhere because they're too shy to ask for help or to reach out to people, or they're really inconsistent with email exchanges. And so you just lose the client and you lose the confidence in the person you're dealing with. And so whenever I talk to teens, I always reiterate like the importance of getting email etiquette down and maybe even setting an alarm in your phone for like 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. or whatever. It can be 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Doesn't matter what time it is, where you have dedicated time where you always respond to emails, where you check your inbox, and, throw things to spam, unsubscribe, do what you got to do, but like be on top of it. Right. Right. Everybody needs this advice.
My gosh. Like I'm thinking of the emails and I'm like, oh, it took so long. How long to respond to that? But, that's good. I think it's how you communicate with the people you work with, the people you work for, the people you want to work for, that's so important. And I think that's sort of an interesting, so the next question I wanted to ask was sort of about, so something I love about astrology, and I think a lot of people do, is that it's so easy to like jump in as an amateur or as like a dabbler and be like, "Ooh, I can do this," like, or I can figure this out for myself. And then as you said, you mentioned the astrology industry of the past few years, and I feel like, especially maybe in the internet, social media age, I feel like you see so many different kinds of astrologers or astrology accounts out there. You know, anyone can make a meme account or make a TikTok with your sign as a frappuccino or something like that. And I sort of love that like anyone, like this is a very sort of accessible thing that everyone can dabble in. But my question is like, is there bad astrological advice or that like we should have a radar out for? Are there, should we trust
No,
anyone with
trust no one. Trust no one.
their
There's
horoscope?
tons of bad astrology out there.
Okay.
And I think a lot of astrologers hate the memes and hate the meme accounts and all of that kind of stuff because astrology annoyingly is not accessible. Bad
Mm.
astrology is accessible. Real
Ah,
astrology is not.
yeah.
That's annoying. But
Huh.
like the problem with astrology, and it's not really a problem, but the problem in the context of our conversation is that it requires a ton of memorization,
Mm.
like a ton of memorization. Let me see if I even have this here. Hold on. Let me show you what astrologers are constantly looking at.
Yeah, oh, that's a
That's
lot.
astrology. This is astrology. And so
Mhm.
when you're really trying to learn astrology, you've got to study it and memorize tons of stuff. It's super time intensive. And in fact, astrology for the bulk of time, because astrology is very old, it's older than Christianity, right? For the bulk of time, astrology was only practiced by scholars.
Mhm.
And until computers existed, it could only be practiced by scholars because it takes so much time to do the math by hand. And if you get one part of your calculation wrong, everything's wrong. Forget
Mhm.
the interpretations, right? There's a
Mhm.
lot of math to it. Now, because of computers and the internet, people don't even notice the math. All these young
Mhm.
astrologers say to me, like, oh, you seem really focused on degrees. I don't really pay attention to degrees. And I'm always like, you can't use astrology without degrees, like not in a serious way. You can in a fun, light way, but not in a
Right.
substantive way.
Okay.
And so this is the problem with like anytime somebody is an expert or like a serious student of a thing, it's like I'm sure therapists, like proper therapists, see all these TikTok accounts and Instagram accounts about, oh, science says and therapy says, and they're like
Mhm.
losing their minds and pulling out their hair, right? It's the same thing with astrology. A lot of it is misinformation, a lot of it is vast generalization. And this
Right.
is what happened in the 1970s. It became popular, it became commodified,
Mhm.
and then it became a joke. And
Mm.
so now because of the internet, because there are real astrologers who are self-publishing and the internet is so democratic, so like any person can
Yeah,
be like, I am an expert and
I'm an
here is my
astrologer.
evidence. Pros and cons. But the pro part of it is that different than the 1970s, I can keep on putting out real astrology content to substantiate astrology. I can
Mhm.
kind of articulate, I can like get on here and share my perspective and show you an ephemeris. In the 70s, it was like the brands got to take hold, the 60s
Mhm.
and 70s, the brands got to take hold of the narrative of astrology. And that's still happening. It's
Mhm.
happening again, but it's also happening that so many of us individual astrologers get to kind of have our own bullhorn that we can speak through as well. So
Sure,
that's really cool.
sure.
But there's lots of bad astrology. There's lots of bad astrology. And it leads to things like people being like, I hate Scorpios. Scorpios are
Right.
bad. I'll never date a Scorpio,
Mhm.
which don't get me started, slash also you should feel free to get me started on that. But yeah, that's just not good astrology. That's like I dated three guys named
Memes.
Chad, and now I don't date Chads. Chads are bad,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
I feel like, yeah, that's what I was thinking of is like, you know, I imagine that like someone could say, oh, this has opened up the gate for lots of new people to start trying it and putting out, which is like, and it's all like in good-ish enough fun. But I was wondering from like, you are a professional astrologer, like there are still lines between these
Yes.
things. Yeah.
So sorry, my phone is making noises. I am so glad that so many people are into astrology. I'm so glad that the floodgates are open. And also, people are calling themselves experts and they're teaching when they're still in the early years of study. And
Mhm.
I am a stickler for ethics. And I am just really a stickler for ethics. And I think there's so much value in being a student of a thing.
Mhm.
And when
Mhm.
we're in the early stages of our learning, it's
Mhm.
irresponsible, not always, but generally, to tell people that we're experts and to teach.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for all things. And if somebody's using astrology to like guide their lives, they should be getting their information from experts and not from people who are just like, I read it in a book.
Yeah.
Because that's not integrated knowledge. That's reading somebody else's work and rewording it, which is part of the learning process of anything. Like that's how you learn, but it's not. It's like fine lines around plagiarism and around like unintegrated knowledge, which the idea of unintegrated knowledge is like a really big one for me, versus integrated knowledge, because I like, they're both very valid. It's like whenever you learn how to do something, like something as simple as learning how to tell time not on a digital clock,
Mhm.
you know when you're first learning how to tell time on a like old school clock, what are they called?
Anal- anal-
What are they called?
Analog? Wait,
Analog clocks? I don't know,
analog?
but you know what I'm talking about. It's a circle and there's like,
Yeah.
yeah, we know what we're saying.
Yeah.
When you first learn how to read time, it takes forever. You're like, wait, going through it again, you're checking. But when you actually know how to read those clocks, it's very simple. You glance at the clock, you see the arms, boom, your brain just makes it
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with all forms of knowledge, whether you're talking about, learning how to code or medicine or astrology. There are levels of integrated knowledge
Yeah.
that allow you to really use what you know. The clock is a weird metaphor, but it popped into
No,
my
I
head. So
see it. No, it works. I think it's beautiful. I guess, I mean, so it sounds like this is sort of, I think you've already touched on this, but I was going to ask, and I'm sure maybe you speak about this a lot, but like, what do you perceive as the biggest misconception about being an astrologer, or about astrology, or being an astrologer? Like, is there?
yeah, there's a bunch of biggest misconceptions. The one that popped into my head when you just asked it
Mhm.
was people think that being an astrologer means that I can tell you your future as though your future was a movie. And in the movie, there's a middle and there's an end.
Mhm.
And it's already been scripted. The lighting, we got a lighting guy, we got a music, like soundtrack, whatever. It's like life is not that. Life is Where's Waldo. And
Mhm.
so, we can only, like, if you haven't seen The Matrix, you need to go watch The Matrix now. But it's like we can only see astrology, while there is an element of prediction, is really about being able to see the path and the tools and the resources and the stumbling blocks on the path. We have free will within that. And within that, we have choices. And
Mhm.
so the choices we make on the path, that right there is really important. And I can see what you're likely to choose. I can see what you want to choose, what's ideal for you to choose, what would be stupid to choose, but I can't see what you're going to choose because that's your call.
Mhm.
So there's a way that people are just like, who's going to win the football game? And like, don't you already know what I want to eat for lunch? And all of
No.
that is ridiculous.
So
Yeah.
it's not like, it's not fortune telling.
No, no,
Yeah.
it can be done in that way.
Mhm.
Just, you know, but that's not inherently what it is. Yeah.
Right. Right. Great question in the chat. So, do you have an astrologist who is like your idol? Who?
Ooh, great question. Definitely no. Partially just because I'm not the kind of person who has idols. Like I don't exactly do that. But I will tell you, I met so there's two astrologers that wrote books that were really instructive to my learning in my early years. And I lecture at astrology conferences pre-plague anyways. And so sorry. And so I've lectured at conferences with both of them now. And when I met them, it's like a normal person would meet Beyonce and they would fall on the ground and
Yeah.
scream. If I met Beyonce, I'm sure I'd be very excited, but I'd be like, fine. These astrologers are my Beyoncés. So Karen Hamaker-Zondag, she's not from the US, obviously, from her name, but she is an amazing astrology writer. And I believe she's a teacher as well. I've attended a couple of her talks. She's great. And then there's a man named Robert Hand. And these two astrologers, their books have been, my greatest teaching, honestly. Yeah. So I really, really like them. I wouldn't call them I don't idolize either of them.
I
But
actually, that's some good perspective. I like
thank you.
that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just not big on fandom. I don't know why. It's just not my personality, but I'm not mad at it.
So something I loved when I first started was reading your horoscopes, listening to your podcast, is I loved the way that you connected social justice movements to planetary events. And that felt very unique, like very fresh to me. Like I had never read about astrology and read someone give a weekly astrological report and be like, this has to do with dismantling white supremacy. And I was like, that's so cool. I wonder, I have now seen I've seen that trend growing. Do you see that as a trend that grows? I just want to give you props because I love that. Do you see that as maybe the future of astrology, or is that part of what astrology has always been about?
It's always been about that. So Ronald Reagan, the trash president, Ronald Reagan. So I want to be really clear. I'm not giving him any props. He famously had an astrologer. There's actually a documentary about out that features that story a lot, which is, Republicans don't like to focus on that. But he had an astrologer. And so she would time meetings with world leaders and all kinds of events for him. Astrology and politics, it's really hard to separate them because when we look back, so when we look at history or something that happened last week, last year, 100 years ago, we can track where the planets were. So we can look at trends and cycles of development and understand something like, and I don't like the term, it's like what people call it, but the Rodney King riots occurred the last time Saturn was in Aquarius. And then as soon as Saturn entered into Aquarius again in 2020, we had the same riots occur for the same reason, for police brutality, white supremacy that is inherent in the system and the system of policing in this nation. It's just one example. There's a lot of examples, like an insane amount of examples. And so astrology has always been able to be used as a tool for looking at politics, which is a part of social justice movements, right? Because the political system has to bend or yield to the needs of the people, theoretically, at least, hopefully. But here's the thing. Astrology, like everything else, has been gatekept by white, straight, cis men, right? And so it's not like this kind of content was like, I would never get a book deal being like, let me talk to you about like the history of social justice. Like there was no way before the internet for people to get their work out into the world because it was really just horoscopes and newspapers and magazines and books. And so it's now there is more people who can self-publish and there's more diverse voices in the field that have audiences and have access to the knowledge. And again, that's thanks to the internet. But I think there's that. And I also think this is very important. It is hard to talk about politics when it's hard to talk about politics, period. People love to tell, especially not white men, to shut up when they talk about politics. I mean, I have had people, when I am talking authoritatively in my field, I have a lot of experience. I am absolutely an expert in my field, but I have literally had people comment on videos I've been in giving talks saying she seems more of like a social justice person than an astrologer. And it's like you can be one or the other. But this is the thing. A lot of astrologers and a lot of spiritual people will say politics and spirituality should be separate. I don't think that's possible because when we're talking about the needs and rights of people, how can we separate that from spiritual integrity? And, if you're an atheist, you can, but for everyone else, you can't. And so I think the movement that we're seeing is more people finding kind of their voice in public. And part of that is because we have more models of people standing up and speaking out about things that are not just like people on TV, and that's new in human history. That hasn't happened before in human history. So I think that's a big part of it. More than it's like a brand new branch, like in astrology conferences, there's always been like
Sounds
looking
amazing. I
at
would love
historical
that.
things.
Sounds like a great event,
Oh,
an
it's
astrology conference.
so nerdy.
Sorry to interrupt, but I was
No,
like,
no, it's so nerdy and fun, but it's like deeply nerdy. It's way nerdier than you think it is. Like think of it and then think,
and
oh
then it's
no, it's way nerdier.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I felt. I was sort of thinking about that, and I was like, this feels maybe new to some of us who are not, who are more casual observers of astrology, but like, I'm sure that this is, people have used it in this way, and that like, this is not just a new, in the 21st century now, we use astrology to talk about politics. Like that can't be a new thing.
But what is new, I think, as you say that, sorry to interrupt, is like now actors and actresses are expected to talk about politics. Like everybody is, no one gets to stay neutral anymore. And I
Mhm.
think that's great. And
Mhm.
also, it can be problematic, because a lot of people don't have their voice and that's not exactly how they engage. But I think what we're seeing within the world of astrology, we're seeing in other industries and in other kind of
Mhm.
worlds.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think astrologers have a unique set of resources, though, and so we are kind of better equipped to talk about the cycles and trends of, uh, you know, different movements related to social justice or injustice, as it were.
Yeah, yeah. That's, I found it very weirdly like comforting and beautiful and creepy and strange to
Me too.
read some of this and be like, what's happening? What's going on? Like this is, it's like touching that weird, I don't know, like galaxy brain, and you're like, oh goodness, it's all, and I just, now I don't know how to talk about it, but
It's all
so
connected. It's
cool.
mind
Yeah.
blowing. Yeah, it is mind blowing. I did all this research into the Civil Rights Act and the
Mhm.
Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s, and all this astrological research essentially into the systematic oppression of people specific. I mean, I don't want to talk about it too much because it'll take us off in a whole thing, but I went back so far and saw these cycles and trends of oppression and liberation and oppression and liberation. To see history through the lens of astrology is just an additional lens. It's not like necessary, you know what I mean? It's like a new
Yeah.
way of understanding it, but it's also a way of understanding, like, on the one hand, it can be depressing because you're like, oh my God, we've been fighting these fights for so long.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's like, oh, if I keep pushing, then the cycle it changes. The cycle gets better.
Mm.
The foundation I lay now, the foundation this movement lays now can be, it might not give you the results you want, but it can be a building block towards something that happens the next time Saturn moves into Aquarius, as an example.
Mm.
Um, and understanding these cycles and trends, if we can get more and more activists and people who are in the political sphere, which we are, which is happening. I know I have a lot of people who are motivated in that regard who listen to my podcast. If we can get more people aware of these cycles and trends, then we can organize around that data
Mhm.
and therefore have our actions be more impactful, like the Reagans did,
Right. Right.
not to
That's,
exalt the Reagans, but they had a
yeah,
great astrologer. They had a great
an
astrologer.
astrologer. We get one little tick there. What is, so getting close to the end of our time, I have a couple more questions. I want to ask what your favorite part of your job is, and what's like the best, most beautiful part of what you do.
Oh, I love so much about my job, but I really love reading charts for people. Like I love it. I love reading charts for people. There's nothing better than having a tool where I can talk to somebody I've never met before and validate things to them about themselves.
Mhm.
And because it makes people feel seen. And when people feel seen, it's transformative, And it's not like your friend being like, no, seriously, you're cute. People like you. It's like being like, oh, look, there's your math. People like you. You're cute. There's your math. Like I can explain what you've experienced. I can kind of get in there. And that to me it's fun, it's uplifting, it's impactful, it's like a good use of my time. There's no downside. It's just, I love giving readings. My favorite thing.
Yeah, that's, I've never had a reading, but like even just doing like some personal in-depth astrology work, it is so insanely cool when you're like, what but I always sort of knew that about myself. And then it's like there, and they're saying that too.
It's
And
shocking and wonderful and validating, right? Yeah.
yeah, it really is. What advice would you give to your teenage self?
Oh, my poor teenage self. Um, ooh, sorry. Let me
It can be kind of a heavy question when I ask that to
I
people.
know. I'm just like, what would I do? Like, shave your head. It'll be fine. You'll love it. You'll leave it shaved for years. That's not the kind of advice I want to give. I would say, I don't know what advice I would give to my teenage self was so unhappy. I wouldn't say it gets better because it didn't get better. I got better. I did the work because I was unhappy and I made my life better.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't want to placate. I hate placations. I hate telling people that things will get better when the only way they get better is if you make them better,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
So I guess I would say, moisturize your neck. Moisturize your neck because you know what? One day you're going to be older and this goes quick. It goes thin. It's not even about wrinkles. Moisturize your neck. Do
Love
not
it.
mess around.
Do not mess around.
That's
That's
the
really
advice
good
I would give
though.
myself.
I think about as someone who works with teams, I think about like what is the advice that I would give myself? And there's also the thing of like, what advice would I have listened to? Like
That's the thing.
I could have come and told my 16-year-old self, like, here's what you should do. Stop worrying about X, Y, and Z. And I would have been like, you don't know. Sorry, I'm gonna keep worrying about it. Like
Exactly. I mean, there's no way to tell somebody to stop worrying when they're worried.
yeah.
It's more about empowering them with tools. And so I think sometimes some of the best things I've done for myself, I can say at this age, I did because I was miserable. I did because I was unhappy. I did because what had been doing wasn't working or the situation I was in was crappy. Um, and so I think there's a great deal of value in committing to figuring out how to mobilize kind of in reaction to things you don't like and make them better instead of to wait for them to get better. Because I see that a lot with my clients. People are like, well, when will this go away? When will this be better? And sometimes it's like magic and, life changes. You wake up in the morning and there's sunshine. But a lot of times it changes because you pick yourself up and you make it change. And I'm a big fan of that. So I wouldn't really change any of that, but I do wish I had moisturized my neck more.
I love that.
I have no regrets about SPF. I don't know, like it's fine. That's fine. It's just the neck thing. I probably would have told myself to, no, no.
Well, it happens for a reason.
Yeah, that's how
Even
I
the
felt.
lack of a moisturized neck, it's like you should have been doing it, but maybe you had better things to worry about. So it's fine.
No one told me. If they had told me, I might have felt different. I only learned how to wear lipstick when I was 40, so I might have enjoyed somebody teaching me. I could have taken myself aside and been like, "This is what you do," but I wasn't ready. You know what I mean? Like everything happens in its right moment.
Do you have advice for teens who are interested in astrology, love it, want to get into it, want to like deep dive? Are there things that they should think about as they swim into this beautiful ocean of meaning?
Yes, so much. If you're into astrology and you're wanting to start really getting serious with it, or low key serious, like maybe not crazy serious, the key is start with yourself and be interested. And if you see something that you think is negative or scary, look for another interpretation. Because I get messages from people all the time, especially young people being like, I read that, this terrible thing exists, or like, I'm not compatible with my best friend when they're actually my best friend and I love them or whatever it is. And, there are many ways of interpreting something. And that's not just with astrology. It's like with medicine. You can go to a dentist and the dentist is like, you got to get that cavity filled. And you go to a different dentist for a second opinion. They're like, no, it's actually, you don't have to get it filled yet. There's different interpretations. So start by being interested instead of looking for like an excuse for why things are hard or validation in that particular way, because I think that astrology can be really validating and wonderful and it can be scary, and when I do readings for teens, which I don't do often, I'm always especially careful because as an adult, an old person, there's like a power differential. So as an adult, old person, if I say to you as a teen, like, oh, you're going to be like this, that power differential creates a problem straight out the gate. And so I think it's valuable to like to be really curious and to be really investigative instead of letting people to tell you who you are, what you're going to be. You get to decide who you are and what you're going to be. And you may have to like walk uphill about it, and you might have to be at the expense of blood, sweat, and tears, but you do get to decide what you're going to be. So it's important to like keep that critical thinking with astrology.
Yeah, sure. I
Yeah.
think when you're young, it can be really hard to get out from under someone telling you you are this or you are that or this is what you're like. And I mean, I know we all have those things that are like rattling around in the back of our head where it's like, someone told me that once and I believe them and it must be true.
Absolutely. The 20s, from an astrological viewpoint, your 20s, leading up to your Saturn return, which happens around 29 years old, are an exercise in proving to yourself and the world around you that you're not your parents, you're not the people you were raised around, and you're not all the people you don't want to be like. That's what your 20s are. And so a lot of it is like those things that people said to you when you were like 10 years old that you can't forget, you can't shake it, even though they might have said it in an offhand way and they don't think about it at all. That stuff stays with you, ideally until you pass your Saturn return at 29. But it's really important to be with astrology aware of, if you're like a queer person and you're reading like really straight, heterotypical, like gendered content, it's going to be invalidating to you. So find queer astrologers. It's about like giving yourself permission to have to like do the work of finding something that actually works for you, and not something that enables you, but something that works for you. And the other thing is there are lots of great astrology books out now. I have one.
We have
I'm
it
trying
at
to
the
think if it's a
library.
little yeah, get it at the library. And there's a bunch out there. There's a bunch out there by, I'm thinking of, I can like, I could name a bunch of people, but also I'm like, well, I don't want to not name certain people. But
Sure.
the point is there's a lot of astrology books out there now. So if you can borrow a book, buy a book, and study, take notes, that's valuable, and CoStar and Pattern and Jenny and all the apps that exist out there, they're great, but they're AI, they're not personalized, right? So you just want to use a grain of salt with that. So with anything, with a podcast, like I have anything, you just want to use a grain of salt and do your own research, right? Learning how to be a critical thinker is a tool that will take you very far in life, like as far as you need to go. IMO.
Yes, no, absolutely. That's what all of us here at the library believe too. You gotta have some critical thinking skills.
Yeah.
My final question is, what is the last great book that you read?
Oh, okay. This is going to sound so nerdy, but I guess I've established like deep nerdishness over here. The last great book I read was about Mr. Rogers.
Oh, okay.
It was a biography about Mr. Rogers, and I'm blanking on the name right now, but it was so good. It was such a good book. His life and story were so fascinating. Did you know that at a certain point, he lost the right to using his own name and to his face? He signed away his rights without realizing it. Being famous is not all it's cracked up to be. Y'all's is.
I see a lot of parallels between your work. I think that
I mean, that's why I read his book, because he's so kindness oriented, and I'm so obsessed with kindness. So I did read that, but I'll say one of my all-time favorite books that I've read countless times is Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler.
Yes.
Love that book.
She is buried in Altadena. She was Pasadena native. We love Octavia. Yeah,
what's not to love?
That's fabulous. We recently read, amongst some staff, we read Emergent Strategy, which is by Adrienne Marie Brown, which is inspired by.
I haven't read it yet.
Oh, Jessica, I think you would.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
I'll also say I love Scott Westerfield's The Pretty series, the Ugly series. I think that's an amazing series.
That is one that like I keep thinking I can read. I'm like, this is old. Nobody reads this anymore. Nope. Still
it's a great series. Also, have you read he has a book about vampirism as an STD? It's also a YA book, but it's like vampirism as an STD. It's a really interesting book. It takes place in Manhattan. Also, I think The Hunger Games, I know it's a movie, whatever. The book is great.
I read that book in one day, I think. When
Yeah.
I was supposed to be packing for like a trip, and I was like, I found the perfect thing to do instead.
Ditto. I mean, not the moving, but the reading it very quickly. I wish I could remember the name of this series. It's a YA series out of Australia.
Mhm.
And it's about these kids that go camping, and then there's like a war that breaks out, and they have to navigate the world and live on their own without adults. It's amazing. It's YA. I wish I could remember the name of it, but
That's like what I mean. We talked about this earlier. That's that feeling of like, I want to read about what it would be like to be on my own, to make my own choices, to like figure myself out, and to like touch the sort of like dark kind of like scary thing that you're thinking about is classic in all of us. We've all been there.
yeah, absolutely. And obviously, I really love the YA genre. Give me a genre that's speculative fiction and has moralistic contents, and I'm in.
Yeah.
I want humanism. Just give me humanism.
Yeah.
I feel like YA is so humanistic.
It is. It really cares. Like, it's about people, and it's about like feelings, and it's like, how do you navigate what it feels like to be a human? Because I feel sometimes when you're a teen, it feels like the most human you'll ever be. You're like, ugh, I am like so tapped in to like the most primal of my hormones, and
Yeah.
You gotta unpack it.
Yeah. And you're discovering the world and inheriting it all at once. And it's a lot of pressure. And again, I want to say, as an astrologer, don't let anyone tell you who you're going to be. Let anyone tell you what you are. You get to make those choices, and you are responsible to your actions, but that just means be responsible to your actions. That's really the key. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been a true delight to talk with you.
Oh, I've had so much fun. Thank you so much
Yay!
for having me.
So glad. As you can check out Jessica's book at the Altadena Library. You can check out her podcast. You can follow her online. She has great content.
Thank you. There's a lot of cussing in the podcast.
Oh,
is that okay? Yeah, we're teens. We're
warning,
not.
there's cussing.
There's a lot of cussing, like a lot of cussing. I have a terrible potty mouth. I cuss for no reason. Sometimes when I'm editing, I'm like, wow, I cussed for no reason in that situation. Like, what is wrong with me?
Relatable to teens. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's good.
Oh my gosh. Jessica, thank you so much. I hope that the rest of your weekend and your 2021 and your plague is as lovely as it can.
Thank you. You too. And thank you to everyone for coming. It's been wonderful. This has been so fun.